Hello, I'm Michael Depp, editor of TVNewsCheck, and this week I'm with Vanessa Otero, founder and CEO of AdFontes Media, and we are talking TV. Talking TV is made possible by Making the Media, a podcast from Avid exploring the forces that shape the media, news, and entertainment business. The latest episode features Avid's Craig Wilson interviewing Charlotte Eamer, head of change at BBC News and Current Affairs. In it, they discuss how to effect long-lasting change within the complex world of news, the key elements you need to implement to achieve your organization's goals, and whether the changes brought by the pandemic will be long-lasting. Making the Media is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, and other podcast platforms. Give it a try. Hello and welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
I am very pleased to have you and very intrigued to have you because you came onto my radar because of a product that you have created, which is called the Media Bias Chart. And this is something that is starting to circulate around a bit. I think that our viewers and listeners to this podcast will be very interested to see what exactly this product does once you explain it a little bit. So, but rather than me say anything, let me just let you kind of set it up and explain first, what is the Media Bias Chart and how did it come about?
So the media bias chart, you may have seen it online in various different iterations since late 2016, which is when I created the first version of it. And it's a two-dimensional visual graph that on one axis, on the y-axis, vertical, shows reliability and news value, and on the left to right axis shows bias. And that's a loaded term, bias, but it plots logos of various different news sources across that two-dimensional graph. So it conveys a lot of information about our news landscape. Why there are some news sources that are better, some that are okay, some that are problematic, some that are worse, and some that are left and right a little, some that are really extremely so. And I created it first as a hobby side project because I'm a big nerd. That's sort of a theme of my life. I'm a patent attorney by profession. That's what I was doing at the time, but it's turned into something much bigger. And I founded a company around it in the beginning of 2018.
Okay. So, and I must ask you about the name of your company, AdFontes Media.
Yeah. So again, back to the nerd thing. We're there again. It's Latin for to the source, literally to the fountain. And it references our content analysis methodology. So the way that most opinions about the news or like bias about the news is measured is by opinion polling, and that's not what we do. We do content analysis. And AdFontes was a call to action in both the Reformation and Renaissance eras when people were seeking truth, and the call to action was, let's go to the source, like the Bible or classical text. And here, as people are seeking truth, like what's true in the news, our approach is to go to the actual content, looking at the text and the graphics and the titles and the links, everything that's in there, listening to the episodes of the podcasts and the TV shows. That's how we rate it, like through an analysis methodology rather than opinion polling.
Okay, so an interesting side note for the Latin enthusiasts among our audience. So why don't you take us under the hood a little bit with this media bias chart and explains how it works? How do you actually quantify bias?
Yeah, when people look at that, look at our chart, we get a few reactions. And that's usually the question that comes to mind because bias is so loaded, and telling like what's more reliable or less, it's the same thing. So what we do is we have 40 analysts, around 40 analysts at AdFontes Media. They're paid, they're trained in our methodology, and we rate overall news sources by rating samples of either articles, if they're web or print, or episodes, if they're podcast or TV. And so we'll have panels of our trained analysts, and they're always divided up into pods of three. So a left leaner, a right leaner, a center leaner. Politically, they self-report their own bias, and then we measure it on the back end as well. And so they rate each of reliability and left to right political bias on a number of different sub-factors. So sub-factors for reliability are, we have a metric called expression and veracity. People think it's always just truth, but there's more to it. Expression, veracity, importance, headline and graphic, those are our main ones. And then sub-factors for bias are, one, political position, that's the main one people think about, but also the language that you use to characterize your political opponents or your issues, like insults or attacks, and a comparison like topic selection and omission. So those sub-factors are all things that they look at in a really granular fashion. And because they do that, it's not just like a gut level impression. They read it on their own. They rate it, they look at each other's scores, they adjust if there's any discrepancies, and then that gets averaged and that rolls up to the overall score for the article, for the source.
There must be some vetting of your analysts then. And these are people,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of backgrounds are they coming from? Other than their self-identified politics, what do you know about your analysts? What are you looking for when you bring them in?
Yeah, the most important qualifications are reading comprehension and political knowledge. So our most common background are journalists and educators and librarians, and then we have folks of other professions, lawyers. 90% of our staff have postgraduate degrees. It's not a requirement, but folks have to have finished at least a couple of years of college. So that's not it. It's necessarily exclusive of like some things. It's not just we don't have any extremists, although we do have like staunch progressive and staunch conservatives on our staff. They're all very reasonable people. So yeah.
So how many people look at each individual? I guess, are you evaluating things on a story by story, piece by piece kind of basis, or are they looking at the news organization more as a whole and giving their rank on that?
It's a story by story. So we get large samples of articles or large samples of episodes, and we plot them for the various characteristics. Like a neutral fact reporting story will get plotted right in the middle, whereas a left-leaning opinion or a right-leaning opinion will get plotted in those sections, and then the overall source score comes from that. So there are a lot of different approaches on like how you could evaluate news organizations, but when you're trying to evaluate all of the different things, from like the best journalism outlets to the opinion shows to fake news, this methodology is able to capture that whole gamut.
So how many pairs of eyes typically look at a given story?
3. So it's always a left, center, and right in one pod looking at the story. Sometimes we'll have like secondary pods in rare cases, but so each of the overall ratings that we've got for our dozens or hundreds of articles for our web sources that we rate.
So how does a specific story or news organization come to be the subject of your scrutiny?
Well, we started just by going by like the most popular. We started with web just because that's sort of the easiest to just find articles online. And then recently, earlier this year, we expanded into podcasts, and now we're launching TV ratings. But we went with like the on Alexa, we have web rankings or in other similar type of your web traffic ranking sites. We just picked the most popular in the various different categories of news. We also get lots of requests. So when new things pop up, people email us about that all the time. People can actually submit articles on our site if they want them to be rated. So we tend to have good ears on the ground for the most popular stories that are making headlines, especially if they're misleading or questionable. And but yeah, we're just expanding basically by reach as best we can across the entire news landscape.
When it comes to evaluating TV news stories, then does that present more challenges because it's video? Your auditors are watching the video clips, or are they reading the closed captioning for the stories? How are they tackling those pieces?
Yeah, they actually watch them all live together. So one of whoever's facilitating the shift will be playing it live, and they watch together, and then they check in with each other. They'll watch the whole episode of whatever episode we're rating, and sometimes that can change from the beginning of the episode to the end. And we're looking at things really closely. What's confusing for folks is that um, the major cable news organizations, they have the name news right in the title. Cable news network, CNN, right? Fox News. And so people think they're watching news, but if you look at the structure of the program, most of the shows are analysis and opinion. So you might hear about, in an hour, you might hear about 3 to 4 stories on one of these programs, but you'll hear maybe 6 to 12 opinions, like guests and pundits. And so they're looking at it, just very, very structurally. They take into account the chyron, the graphics, and the words that the host is saying. If it's a lot of invective, a lot of adjectives, a lot of slamming or of the other side, that makes it more opinionated and biased. But they'll take into account the guests as well. So are the guests there for analysis? Are the guests there for the opinion? Or is it a guest that's a journalist from another news organization that's trying to report the facts back to the host? Those are all different things. Those are all the things that our analysts take into account, and they do watch them live together.
Okay. There is also a disparity often between what you might see in the chyron, which could be very hyperbolic, or the headline story, which is designed to grab attention, and then the actual story itself. Very often you'll read a story and think, wow, there's quite a lot of daylight between this and the headline that initially attracted me to it. So how do you factor in that chasm that kind of opens up there in those stories?
Yeah, for web, and for TV, we weight the headline and graphic quite heavily because you've seen statistics out there about how most people just see the headline, especially on social media, and they might share just based on the headline. And often, the headline's often quote worse than the story, and there's another layer of it. The tweet is often worse than the headline, which is often worse than the story, right? So when there's a big disparity between what the headline or the chyron says and the actual substance of the story, that really weights. That's a heavy factor in our weighting of the overall reliability of the story itself.
Okay, so this is a product. Who is the end user for this?
So the main ones are, brands, agencies, and social media companies, as well as the data platforms that are within that ecosystem, because there's the big problem that so many brands are running into right now is they're being held responsible, often for the first time, for the content that they sponsor, especially if it's misinformation or extremely divisive. I mean, we've seen the effects of, like, everybody kind of knows this is a problem, right? If you just look at the past year, misinformation about COVID and the election as the two main examples, just made existing problems so much worse. And when consumers are looking to, like, who they can hold accountable, companies are really big players in this media ecosystem. They fund the good journalism and defund it if they pull their ad dollars out. Unfortunately, that's been devastating for good national publishers and good local publishers. And but they're actively funding misinformation and some of the most divisive content and rhetoric. And it's really profitable to have TV news and opinion shows that don't tell the truth or that really drive this kind of division. Same with podcasts. Those are some of the most, quote, engaged audiences, but brands are realizing that there's this huge risk in just chasing the engaged audience without taking into account what that audience is engaged about. Are they engaged about outraged about something that's misinformation? And so companies are starting to think more about their misinformation and bias impact on the news ecosystem. Like companies think about sustainability and diversity, equity, inclusion. This is another like foundational pillar of our societies, like the news we consume. So this tool is used for media planning.
Okay, so gauging brand safety for brands themselves and for agencies primarily, but you do have some. Do news organizations ever retain you to get an outside take on their own bias to try to recalibrate around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do audits for publishers, especially when you can imagine, yeah, publications, especially like local ones or ones that are trying to, national ones that are trying to be neutral and as unbiased as possible, they get complaints about bias. So, as a sanity check, they want to see, hey, can we have a third party organization come and look at this? And the ones that are really trying and care, I mean, there's a real chasm between the ones that are trying and the ones that are purposely not trying to be balanced. So usually the types of publishers that are looking for audits are trying to do a good job. And we do hear from publishers all the time. Everybody sort of knows where their own organization falls on the media bias chart if we've got them rated on there.
Okay. All right. So, um, have you had any pushback from any news organizations who didn't agree with your tool's assessment of their reporting?
Yeah, I mean, not so much disagreement, but increase. I will tell you that the ones in the bottom corners, some of them really like the bottom corners of the chart are like, hyper partisan or extreme, or they've got reliability issues. There are a handful of those that really don't like what we're doing because we're just calling attention to it, but they sort of know what they're doing as well. But
Who are they? Who are the ones that are? I think we can all imagine, but
you
just
you you can imagine, but yeah, if you look at like Infowars was the first to like come out on the attack. They made their own chart, which you can find on the internet, where they're at the apex of whatever their axes are. But on the left on the web, Wonket, yeah, and Palmer Report, not big fans of what we do. So they publish their own things about how terrible we are. But we've got outlets that are have even if they have like just a slight left bias on our chart, even though if it's a really reliable rating, they ask why, and we're able to respond about the actual data points on the articles. There are certain outlets uh, that complain about a lot of quote mainstream media as it leans left. Well, sometimes it is just because the topic selection of those articles. Maybe somebody will if the it is news if Ivanka Trump, for example, said something that was kind of silly, or people dunked on her for saying it, right? If that's a lead story on a mainstream news outlet, that's of more interest to left-leaning audiences. It just is, right? So something like that will skew it. It's not super biased because it's true, but just that kind of topic selection can make something shade just a little bit left or just a little bit right.
Mhm. How
But yeah, we respond with data points on our and notes on how we rated stuff for those publishers.
how dramatically or not have you recalibrated your assessment process since you began doing this some years ago?
Oh, a lot, because but when I started, it was just me. Like I didn't think it was going to be a thing. I just created this chart based on my own, analysis and a few hundred articles that I looked at for a few dozen news sources, and I put it online. But it just took off like and we went viral beyond my wildest imagination. I never had a viral thing like this before, but people kept asking me for my data and the methodology, and their complaint would be like, "Oh, you're biased. This chart is biased because you're biased." And I thought, well, that's true. How do I make it less so? And teachers would be printing this in, using this in class, and publishers would be using this in textbooks. So to me, it was like alarming because I felt like it could be a lot like this needed to be a lot more academically rigorous, but there really wasn't anything like this out there.
Mhm.
So, over time, I had, first volunteer analysts, and then and then we grew into a company, figured out how we could make this a product and service. It's a data and SaaS platform, interactive platform for visualizing our data for the people that the good stakeholders, the stakeholders in good news media. So now we've got a like really strict methodology with lots of controls in place and lots of analysts. It's not just me, and it's very structured.
And that methodology is made plain. You have that on the, I mean, you've explained a lot of it here, but that's also
Mm-hmm.
on your website, presumably. And
Oh yeah, we've got videos and we've got details. We actually teach the methodology. We make it an educational product for school. So teaching this, webinar series right now for teachers on how to teach news literacy and how, how students can do this themselves, because it's one thing to people come and just disagree, say, oh, CNN should be further left or whatever. Well, what are we basing that on? We'll teach you the methodology, no matter whether you're in school or not, so you can do this yourself. You shouldn't just trust us, you should think for yourself. Absolutely.
Okay, so you mentioned SaaS before. Is that how this thing makes money? Is it software as a service?
hmm Yeah. So what underlies this all is our data. We have ratings data for web and TV and podcasts, and we deliver it via a SaaS subscription.
Okay. And what's for you and for this company, what's the end game here? What do you hope to achieve with it?
Oh, just to make news consumers smarter and news media better. I mean, I want to fix the news ecosystem. Everyone knows how frustrating it is to argue with somebody online that you're not going to get anywhere with, and it just feels like an endless unwinnable battle, and it's causes a lot of despair for folks. Like, we've got all these problems that are very apparent about misinformation and extreme polarization, and it's like, if I see one more poll about that, I'm going to scream. Like, what do we do about it? And so, to me, this is something where, like, it news ratings are sort of like nutrition labels. It's like this baseline, part of a solution, but it's something that multiple stakeholders in news media need to apply in order to actually fix stuff. So it's not just brands and agencies. Consumers need to not spread misinformation. Educators need to teach media literacy. The social media companies need to figure out their role in distribution of this information. So when everyone starts working on these problems, then we can make some real progress, and I think we can. I'm optimistic, and that's what keeps me going here.
Okay, well, just lastly, back to TV,
Yeah.
because you're moving into expanding to evaluate that. You just added someone to your advisory board on that front.
Yes. So Elizabeth Tumulty, she's a former president of CBS Television. We're really honored to have her on our advisory board. We've been really lucky to attract such great advisors on our team, and Elizabeth is the latest one, just because she's a veteran of the TV news industry, and knows the ins and outs of how it's funded by ads in everywhere from like local markets to the national networks, and now the changes in CTV. It's really crucial to have that kind of she finds value in what we're doing, because she's gone around speaking on the issue of media bias and how damaging it can be to society. She used our chart initially, and that's how she found us. Yeah, so we're really excited to have her on board, and just uh, make the changes that we can in all the different types of news media. TV is just such a big, important one.
And let me just ask you, lastly, just between us, with the TV organizations that you are evaluating so far, both cable and network, give us an idea of where they're falling on your chart so far.
Yeah. So everyone is really familiar, and everyone has opinions on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, right? And we'll get complaints like, MSNBC should be the mirror image of Fox, or CNN should be the mirror image of Fox. Obviously, both of those things can't be true. So we plot them. Obviously, Fox is hyper partisan, right? But what we do is, and it's in mostly the opinion analysis range. MSNBC and is further left than CNN is, but we break it out show by show. So as everyone intuits, there is a big difference between Chris Wallace's show on Fox News and Tucker Carlson's show, right? We show the difference show by show. Same thing with Andrea Mitchell reports, or Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC, or Don Lemon and Aaron Burnett on CNN. So we've got those kind of where you would expect them, but we've got on the right, we've got OAN and Newsmax that are we're sort of opportunistic in post-election time and trying to differentiate themselves from Fox News, not in a good way, in a more misinforming way. And so you can see those lower and to the right.
Mhm.
We've also got some CTV and online sources like The Young Turks is a really popular online source that we've got rated. It's for further to the left than MSNBC, and we've got things like Cheddar, Bloomberg, News Nation, Newsy, the stuff that you is not necessarily as popular, but it is gaining steam on CTV apps.
Well, what about ABC, NBC, CBS?
Oh yeah, of course. I left those out. Yep, and those are all the traditional networks come from a long tradition of where like they used to be the only news. So they're up towards the top. I think NBC is I think the left to most of each of those, but only slightly so. But yeah, they're in that most reliable area generally.
All right, I'm going to want to see some of this data, take a closer look at a lot of
Yeah,
the what's out
absolutely.
there. So, well, Vanessa Otero, founder and CEO of AdFontes Media, really interesting talking with you. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael.
Cheers.